They didn't put my name in the obituary, not in the printed version in the paper, not in the church bulletin, and certainly not in the program they handed out at the entrance. The font was elegant, the layout pristine my mother would have approved, but there was no mention of her oldest son. I wasn't surprised. I hadn't been part of this family for years, at least not in the way they acknowledged. I arrived early, dressed in full army dress blues, the same uniform I wore the day I retired from the military after 38 years of service. The medals weren't meant to impress anyone. I wore them because they were mine, because they were earned, because I refused to shrink for people who'd already decided I should disappear. No one greeted me at the door. The usher glanced at me and pointed to the back row. I took my seat quietly, hands folded in my lap, eyes forward. I didn't come for them. I came for her, for the woman who raised me to believe that honor meant something, even when the world forgot it did. For the woman who once pressed a military patch into my hand and said, "Come back whole or don't come back at all." But somewhere along the way, after deployments and decisions after loss and silence, my mother changed. Or maybe I did. Maybe time hardens some people and softens others. Either way, we stopped calling each other. Now I was a ghost in my own family's story. They seated my younger brother Mark in the front row. He looked sharp in a gray suit tie knotted too tight, jaw clenched, like he was trying to win a fight without using words. His wife clung to his arm. My daughter Grace sat beside them, back straight, eyes blank. She didn't look around, didn't see me, or pretended not to. That hurt more than I expected. The service began. Polished voices read scripture. The organ hummed beneath soft hymns. And then it was time for the family remarks. Mark stood. He began with the expected stories of childhood lessons learned, recipes Mom always made wrong but insisted were perfect. People laughed softly. Then he shifted. He spoke about what it meant to be present, to show up, to stay close, to not run away when things got difficult. And that's when it happened. He looked straight ahead and said, "Some people disappear when it matters most. Others carry the family forward." My daughter glanced toward him, then slowly nodded. I didn't move. Not a twitch. Not a blink. Then Grace stood. Her voice was steady, carefully rehearsed. "My grandmother taught me strength," she said. "And she taught me the difference between someone who sacrifices for their family and someone who sacrifices their family." There were no gasps, no reaction. Because for them, this wasn't shocking. It was a confirmation. I had been judged and sentenced years ago. Today was just the formality. But they weren't expecting what came next. From 3 rows behind me, a man stood. He wore a dark suit, military haircut still evident despite the years, eyes sharp beneath his age. He looked out over the pews and said clearly, "Forgive me. I wasn't planning to speak. But I can't stay silent." The entire room turned. He paused, then pointed at me. "That man," he said, "is Colonel Thomas Avery. In 2007, he led the mission that saved my unit from being wiped out in Fallujah. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him. None of us would." Silence rippled through the room. Then another voice. A woman in the aisle. "I served under Colonel Avery in Kandahar. He taught us what leadership meant." Then another. "I owe him my life." And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. The room that had once erased me now couldn't unsee me. Grace's face went pale. Mark gripped the edge of the pew. But I didn't rise. I didn't speak. I just sat there still and steady as the truth finally cracked open, the silence they'd buried me in. People think betrayal is loud. They imagine it happens with slammed doors, angry words, final arguments. But in my case, it came slowly, quietly, one conversation at a time, one missed phone call, one withheld invitation, until eventually it came with a signature on a document I wasn't even asked to review. After I retired from active duty, I came back to Georgia with nothing but a few trunks, a couple uniforms, and a plan to finally rest. 38 years in the Army, combat deployments, a Bronze Star, more lost than I care to count. But still I returned home, hoping that I hadn't stayed away too long to belong. My father had passed 10 years earlier, and my mother lived alone in the same two-story colonial she'd refused to sell. My younger brother Mark had built a real estate business in the city. He had everything my life didn't: a stable marriage, shiny cars, country club friends, Christmas cards with golden retrievers. I had purpose, not polish. Grace. My daughter was 29 by then. We hadn't spoken in over 4 years. The last time we talked, she told me she didn't understand why I chose to miss her college graduation for a final deployment. I tried to explain. I couldn't leave the unit, I said. We were short-staffed. I was responsible for 45 soldiers. She didn't answer my letters after that, so when I came home I expected distance. I didn't expect erasure. At first it was subtle. Family events happened without me. Birthdays passed with no calls. Mom would send updates through secondhand messages: Mark says Grace is doing well, or they all had a wonderful time last weekend, as if I were a distant neighbor, not a son or father. Then came the meeting. Mark invited me to lunch, called it a catch-up. I wore my civilian clothes. He wore cufflinks. He talked for a while about the market, the company expansion plans. Then he shifted. Mom's estate isn't huge, he said, but it's important we start planning. I've already spoken with a lawyer about consolidating assets. Grace will handle the trusts. Wait, I said. Don't I get a say in this? Mark looked at me the way civilians look at aging veterans, like something once sharp, now dulled. You've been gone a long time, Tom, because I was serving. Right? He said with a smile too tight to be kind. But that was your choice. 2 weeks later, I received a copy of the will. My name was listed once. A passing mention. No shares, no trust, no voting rights in the family property, nothing of substance. It wasn't about money. It was about meaning. They had rewritten the story of who mattered. And in this new version, I wasn't part of the core cast. I confronted Mom. She didn't raise her voice, didn't even deny it. You've always been a wanderer, she said, always somewhere else. I was serving my country. And while you were gone, she replied, we were still here. We built something without you. That was the moment I realized the truth. They resented my service. They saw my absences as abandonment, my discipline as distance, my medals as self-congratulation. And the longer I stayed away, the easier it became for them to crop me out of the frame. Grace sent me an email one Christmas, 3 lines. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can keep pretending we're close. I needed a father when I was young. Now it's too late. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I knew I couldn't say anything that would sound like enough. I'd spent my life saving strangers, and somehow I'd lost the people closest to me in the process. I started keeping a journal. Nothing dramatic, just lines in a black notebook. Names of soldiers I served with, lessons learned, things I'd do differently if I had the chance. I told myself it was for me. But maybe deep down I hoped that someday someone would read it and understand. Back then I lived in a small house near the outskirts of town. 1 bedroom, 1 radio, 1 old dog who didn't care what my rank used to be. I volunteered at the VA clinic, fixed broken radios and flashlights for the local hardware store. Life was simple, stripped of status. But every now and then I'd pass a newsstand or see a headline about the company my family ran, Ellery Properties, and I'd remember what I used to be part of, what I helped protect, what they no longer saw value in. A friend of mine from the Army, Calvin, used to joke, "You can survive war, Tom, but not Thanksgiving dinner." He wasn't wrong. I was invited to nothing. My name was spoken only as an anecdote. My brother was military, as if I were some cautionary tale. Then one day I got a phone call from a former soldier I once mentored. He said, "Sir, do you remember that time in Mosul when you refused to leave without the interpreter?" "I remember." He paused. "You changed the way I lead. Just wanted you to know." I hung up and cried for the first time in years, not because of the compliment, because I realized that the people I bled beside respected me more than the ones who shared my blood. And I started to understand something. Maybe some families don't want to understand your sacrifices. Maybe they need a villain to explain why they feel abandoned. And maybe if you stand too tall for too long, some people will do anything to cut you down so they don't have to feel small. I didn't vanish after they wrote me out. I just stopped trying to be seen. There's a difference between disappearing and choosing solitude. The first is done to you. The second is an act of preservation. I moved into a modest house near Fort Benning. It was old, nothing fancy, paint peeling on the shutters, a garage that creaked when the wind hit right. But it was mine. Quiet. Predictable. The kind of place where time slowed down enough to let your thoughts catch up with you. Each morning I walked the same stretch of road boots soft against the gravel. I stopped by the same diner, ordered black coffee, and nodded at the regulars who knew me only as Tom. No one called me Colonel. No one asked what I used to be, and I didn't offer it. But I didn't waste away. I started repairing radios. At first, just my own, then the neighbors', then the police scanner for the local fire station. People brought me things, old watches, cassette players, handheld scanners, and I fixed them. Slowly. Precisely. Like I'd been trained. There was something sacred in putting broken things back together. It reminded me of the field hospitals, of the clatter of tools, and the quiet urgency of hands that knew what to do. These machines didn't judge me. They didn't ask why I missed birthdays. They didn't hold grudges for deployments. They just waited to be restored. Every Thursday, I volunteered at the VA Center. Mostly, I sat with guys who didn't like to talk. We played chess, we told bad jokes. Sometimes we said nothing at all. That silence was its own kind of language, one that civilians never really learn. One afternoon, a young man, barely 25, pale shaking, walked in and sat across from me. "You're the guy who fixed Peterson's old radio, right?" "Guilty." He hesitated. "You used to serve," I nodded. "A few decades, give or take." He exhaled like that was permission. Then he talked about his nightmares, about how his parents told him to just move on, about how every time he tried to apply for a job, someone told him he looked too intense. I listened. That's all he needed. Not advice, not a solution, just someone who knew the terrain. He came back the next week, then another guy, then two more. Eventually, they started calling my garage the bunker. They'd sit on old milk crates, sip bad coffee, and talk about whatever they couldn't say elsewhere. No press, no judgment. Just ground-level truth. Some of them had families who stopped speaking to them. Others never had families to begin with. One guy said his wife left him because he talked too much like a soldier. I told him that wasn't something to be ashamed of. "Your voice," I said, "is shaped by the weight you carried. If she can't hear that, that's her silence, not yours." Word spread, not fast, not flashy, but steady. People started coming not just for repairs, but for clarity. A woman once brought her father's World War II medals and asked me how to display them. A teenager dropped by with her grandfather's flight log and asked if I could explain it. I never charged them. Some things are worth more than money. One night I got a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photograph, black and white, faded. It showed a much younger me, helmet, tilted eyes, squinting against the sun, one arm around a wounded soldier. On the back, someone had written, "Still standing, sir? No signature." I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because I missed those days, but because it reminded me I hadn't disappeared. Not really. I just stopped performing for people who wanted to forget I existed. There's a strange freedom in that. When you realize you don't have to convince anyone of your worth anymore. You don't have to chase an apology that was never meant for you. You simply carry your story like armor. Not to attack, not to defend, just to walk upright. The past didn't vanish. It just settled into something quieter, something heavier, something earned. And I began to understand silence isn't weakness, it's strength refined. I arrived at the church an hour early. Not because I wanted to sit and grieve, but because I knew how these things worked. If I didn't get there first, they'd find a way to make sure I was out of sight, out of frame, out of mind, again. The sanctuary smelled like lemon oil and old carpets. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the pews. Everything looked polished, composed. Exactly how my mother would have wanted it. There was a table at the front with family photos. I walked past it slowly. There she was in the same images I remembered standing beside my father at the lake, holding baby Grace at a birthday party, laughing with Mark and his kids at a picnic. All smiles, all warmth, but not a single photo of me, not one. I leaned in, checked the corners, nothing. Even in the military photos, when my deployment ceremony had been held in that very church, I'd been cropped out. A flag and a podium, but no me. Erased again. The usher found me. "You're with the Ellery family?" I turned. "I'm Thomas Ellery." He blinked. "Oh, yes, of course. You're seated? Back left." Not a mistake. A message. I walked to the seat, fourth row from the rear beside a pillar that blocked the altar. I sat, took off my hat, folded it into my lap. The guests trickled in. Suits, pearls, handshakes, murmurs. I recognized most of them. I'd grown up with some. Others had worked at the family company. A few had even attended my retirement ceremony before the silence started. Not a single one acknowledged me. I watched Grace enter in a dark blue dress, hair pulled into a careful chignon. She didn't glance in my direction. Mark followed close behind his wife on his arm, nodding graciously to each guest like a man running for office. He'd grown into that role, polished, public, perfect. They sat in the front row, of course. As the service began, I focused on the casket. Simple, oak, dignified. A folded flag lay across it. My mother had been a wartime nurse in her youth, though she never liked to talk about it. That flag should have meant something, but even it felt like a prop now. The pastor spoke, then the music played, then the eulogies began. Mark stood first. He delivered his words like a campaign speech, charming, tearful, in the right places, hitting all the sentimental beats. He spoke of legacy, of family strength, of those who stayed by her side. He didn't mention me. Then came Grace. Her voice was soft, controlled. My grandmother taught me everything she said. She taught me resilience, how to lead with quiet grace. And most importantly, she taught me how to know when someone no longer belongs in your life. She paused, looked down. A few guests murmured approval. She once told me that presence matters more than titles, that love is about showing up. Another pause. And some people just never showed up. No one needed her to say my name. They knew. I was the only one in uniform, sitting in the shadows, surrounded by the weight of 100 glances that had already judged me before I walked through the door. My throat burned, not from anger, but from something older, something deeper. Grief, maybe, or the dull ache of being cut from your own story. I didn't move. Not when the guests clapped softly, not when the slideshow began. Not when they showed photos I should have been in. The lights dimmed, people wiped their eyes. Grace returned to her seat. Then from the back of the room someone stood. A man in his late 30s, neatly dressed, confident posture, hair clipped short. "I'm sorry," he said, voice clear. "I wasn't scheduled to speak, but I can't sit here and let this pass." Heads turned. I didn't know Mrs. Ellery personally, but I knew her son. He pointed to me. That man sitting right there saved my life. In Fallujah, 2007, our convoy was ambushed. We lost 3 vehicles. Communications were down. I was bleeding out, trapped behind a wreck. He came back for me, alone, under fire. Silence. No one ordered him to do it. He did it because it was the right thing, because that's who he is. He looked at Grace. And if you're going to talk about who shows up, Maybe mention the man who spent 38 years showing up for a country that forgot how to thank him. Gasps. Not many, but enough. Another man stood, this one older. A cane in one hand cap tucked under the other arm. I served under Colonel Ellery in Bosnia, he said. He taught me how to lead without yelling, how to stay calm when everything was falling apart. Then a woman in uniform. He helped me get back on my feet after discharge. He fixed my transmission, gave me a place to stay, and never once asked for anything in return. I stayed seated, hands still in my lap, watching as the room twisted. People who had laughed 5 minutes ago now sat still. Grace stared at the floor. Mark looked like someone had slapped him. No one told them to stop talking. They just did, because something larger had entered the room. The truth. I didn't need to speak, didn't need to interrupt, because for once the silence was finally working in my favor. I didn't stand. Not when the young man who served under me spoke. Not when the others followed one by one, rising from pews I hadn't noticed them in. Former soldiers, men and women I had trained, led, fought beside. Some I hadn't seen in 20 years. Others I only recognized from the lines of their posture, the way they stood at attention without being asked. It was quiet, not a funeral silence, but something heavier. A room holding its breath because it had just remembered its shame. No one tried to stop them. Not the pastor, not Mark, not Grace. It was too late for that. They had built this ceremony to frame me as absence, and now presence was unraveling it piece by piece. The young man, the first to speak, turned back toward me. "Colonel," he said simply, "thank you." I gave him the smallest nod. It was all I could manage. Another voice came from the back. "Sir, you probably don't remember me. Camp Victory, Baghdad. You taught us how to radio scramble with nothing but a spoon and a frequency chart." Laughter rippled through the vets, not mocking, remembering. Then a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. "Colonel Ellery was my instructor at ROTC. I failed every test until he pulled me aside and said, 'You can quit, or you can fight like hell. Either way, decide.' I stayed. I commissioned. And I made it because he didn't let me lie to myself." I turned. She was older now. Married name, maybe. But I remembered the fire in her. She had wanted to quit during field exercises because no one took her seriously. She stayed. She led. She became better than any of us imagined. The words came like a tide, unplanned, unrehearsed, but real. My life echoed through them. Not in speeches or honors or photos, but in flesh and blood, in lives shaped by choices I made when no one was watching. They didn't come because I asked them to. They came because truth has a way of surviving silence. That's what legacy is. Not the plaque on a wall, not the paragraph in an obituary. It's the way people remember what you did when it mattered most. I looked at my daughter. Grace's face was blank, but her hands shook. Her grandmother, the woman who taught her how to braid hair and make blackberry cobbler, had just been buried. But now she sat staring at the man she had erased, surrounded by strangers, calling him by a title she'd refused to use. Her words hung in the air. Some people just never showed up, and now the room knew how wrong she had been. Mark for once had nothing to say. He stared at the floor like it might open and swallow him. The pastor, looking unsure of himself, stepped forward. Would anyone else like to share? I could have spoken. I could have stood up and told them how it felt to be forgotten. I could have listed every time I picked up a phone and waited for someone who never called back. I could have told them that I didn't come to reclaim a place at the table. I came because someone should remember her. With truth, not just convenience. But I didn't, because they already knew. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a ribbon. It was old, faded, tucked inside a small plastic case. My mother had mailed it to me during my second deployment, along with a note that said, "Don't come back empty." She never explained what she meant, but I carried it anyway. I stood, walked slowly to the front, and laid it on the casket. No speech, no ceremony, just that. Then I turned and walked back to my seat. The message was clear. I remembered her, even if she forgot how to remember me. The pastor tried to move the ceremony forward, but the tone had shifted. Everything that came next, the prayers, the final hymn, the polite hugs, was soaked in discomfort. No one quite looked at me, but no one could ignore me either. After the service, I stepped outside. The air was sharp with early autumn. Leaves drifted down like reminders of time refusing to stand still. A man approached, middle-aged, glasses civilian. "You don't know me," he said, "but my nephew served under you. In Afghanistan. Said you stayed with him until the medevac arrived, even though the area wasn't secure." I nodded. "I remember. He said you talked about home the whole time like it would keep him alive." I didn't respond. What could I say? He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded page. He wrote this after he got out. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should give this to you. I took the page. It was short, simple. "Sir, if you're reading this, I probably didn't make it, but that's not your fault. It never was. You taught me how to lead by being human. That's rare. Thank you. PFC. Garrison." I closed my eyes, not because I needed to cry, but because sometimes silence is the only way to keep yourself from breaking. People think being a soldier is about bullets and orders, but it's not. It's about carrying pieces of people long after they're gone. It's about remembering names the world forgets. It's about showing up even when no one claps. When I opened my eyes again, the parking lot was half empty. I saw Grace standing near her car, arms crossed, looking anywhere but at me. She hadn't left. Not yet. I considered walking toward her, but I didn't. Because some conversations can't happen in the shadow of other people's guilt. They need space and time, and the weight of silence to settle first. So I turned and walked the other way. The funeral had ended, but something else had started. Something I hadn't felt in years. Not forgiveness, not closure, but presence. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible. Not because I forced them to see me, but because I let the truth speak louder than I ever could. After the funeral, I didn't go home. Not right away. I took the long route out of town past the old mill, the diner where Mom used to take us on Sundays, the overgrown ball field, where I taught Grace to hit her first grounder. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. Not because it had shrunk, but because I had changed. I stopped by the old VFW hall. It was mostly empty, just a few older vets playing dominoes near the coffee machine. They looked up, nodded. One of them said, "You're the guy from the Ellery funeral, right?" I paused, unsure. He smiled. "We saw the clip. I hadn't known anyone filmed it." He added, "You stood taller without saying a word than most men do, shouting through microphones." I sat down at the corner table, accepted a lukewarm coffee, and just breathed. No one asked questions. No one needed me to explain. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was defending my own presence. In the days that followed, the phone started ringing. Not constantly, just once or twice a day. An old student from ROTC, a former private from my second tour, a young widow who said her husband always spoke about Colonel A like he was 10 feet tall. Some of them asked for nothing. They just wanted to say thank you. Others asked for advice. About jobs. About VA benefits. About how to talk to their kids when they couldn't find the right words for their own trauma. I answered as best I could. Sometimes I didn't have answers, but I listened. That seemed to matter most. Word spread again. Not on TV, not in headlines, but in the quiet channels, emails, DMs, folded notes passed between support groups. People started calling my garage HQ. They dropped by for coffee, for repairs, for a place to sit where they didn't have to perform strength. I bought extra folding chairs, put a small fridge in the corner with sodas and instant noodles. There was no funding, no nonprofit status, no mission statement. Just a sign out front, handwritten, that read, "You're not forgotten." A young man named Devin, 24, recently discharged, asked me one afternoon, "So what is this place, like a counseling center?" I shook my head. Not exactly. Then what I thought about it. then said, "It's a place where we don't have to explain ourselves." He nodded. Came back the next day. One night, I stayed up late cleaning an old shortwave set. I was tuning it for a friend who used to be a Navy radio operator. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory built over decades. Then I paused. The silence in the garage wasn't empty. It was earned. That night, I wrote something in my notebook, more instinct than plan: the forgotten ranks. A place for veterans erased by the people they served to protect. I underlined it twice. Didn't know why. Maybe I just needed to name the ache. Maybe naming it was the first step in turning it into something useful. Over the next few weeks, I met others like me. Men whose wives called them too intense. Women whose parents said you were nicer before the military. Sons and daughters who came home with honorable discharges but dishonored welcomes. Some had medals, some had scars, some had both. But all of them carried silence, the same way I did, with weight, with dignity, with exhaustion. And I realized we weren't broken. We had just outgrown the stories our families told about us. So I started putting things in motion. Got help filing paperwork for nonprofit status. Reached out to a lawyer, another vet who offered to draft our charter for free. Put up a basic website, just a homepage with 5 words: "We don't erase the wounded." It caught on faster than I expected. Local news came by, then a regional paper. Then one of the bigger veteran advocacy pages reposted a photo of me standing outside the garage under a makeshift sign. The headline read, "Retired Colonel Builds Sanctuary for Veterans Discarded by Family." I didn't recognize myself in the photo, but I recognized the purpose. People started donating. Small amounts, gift cards, boxes of coffee, a microwave. One man sent a single dollar bill and a note that said, "Wish I could give more, but thank you for making me feel less alone." I taped that dollar to the wall above the door, because it wasn't about the money. It was about being seen. And little by little, that's what we were becoming: seen. Without anger, without shouting, without demanding apologies, just standing still in the truth of what we'd survived and what we'd refused to surrender. Not rank, not war stories, not honor, but dignity. Dignity rebuilt not with microphones or medals, but with eye contact, late-night coffee, and the kind of listening that tells someone you still matter. You never stopped. It started as a joke. Someone, probably Devin, scribbled the phrase "still standing" on the whiteboard in the garage, right under the weekly schedule for coffee runs and group check-ins. I saw it, smiled, and left it there. The next week, someone else added to it. "Still standing," even after they sat us down. Then came a t-shirt, hand-printed uneven black letters on gray cotton. "Still standing." No rank, no logo, just the truth. I didn't plan it, but the name stuck. The Forgotten Ranks became the official name of the non-profit. Still Standing became our identity. We weren't about combat stories. We weren't about patriotism slogans. We were about the years after, the part no one films, the quiet collapse after medals are boxed and families forget your name, and the steady, stubborn decision to keep going anyway. Within 3 months, we had more than 50 members. Not all in person. Some joined through video chats. Others sent letters. Some didn't say much at all, just signed their names and mailed us a patch, a coin, a story. There was a man in Montana who sent a folded napkin with 6 names written on it, his old squad. A woman in Florida mailed a snapshot of her standing outside her parents' house, suitcase, in hand, captioned, "They told me I came back different. I said I came back alive." A retired Navy medic sent a single sentence, "I was a son once. We kept everything." We built a wall in the back of the garage and started pinning these stories to it. Letters, photos, dog tags, scraps of camo, even empty prescription bottles with dates marked in Sharpie. We called it the Honor Wall, not for glory, but for memory. Because when the world forgets you, sometimes all you need is a wall that says you were here. Still standing became more than a phrase. It became a signal. We printed more shirts. A local screen printer offered to help. Volunteers arrived. Students, veterans, old factory workers, asking how they could pitch in. We turned the garage into a proper space, got a used coffee machine, installed new lighting, built a shelf for donated boots and jackets. By the 4th month, we had a sign out front made from reclaimed wood, still standing, Veterans Center, for those who were left behind but never gave up. That week, the mayor stopped by. She wasn't what I expected, young, sharp, former Air Force intelligence. "I read your story," she said, "and I thought finally someone's saying what no one else will." I nodded. "We're not loud, just here." "Well," she said, "maybe we can make that presence permanent." She offered city grant money, public space, a long-term lease if we ever outgrew the garage. I declined the first offer, accepted the second. We didn't need flash. We just needed time. And time finally was working in our favor. Grace called that night. First time in over a year. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She just said, "I saw the article." I waited. "I didn't know what you were building," she said. "I didn't know what you'd become." I almost told her that I hadn't become anything new. I had always been this. They just hadn't looked close enough. But I said nothing. Because growth doesn't always need to be acknowledged to be real. The next week, a group of local students asked if they could interview us for a school project. Devin rolled his eyes. High schoolers. But they showed up, 4 of them. Clipboards, cameras, nervous smiles. They asked thoughtful questions. What's it like to feel invisible? What does honor mean when no one's watching? How do you define family? Now one of the students, a tall, quiet kid in a faded hoodie, looked at the honor wall for a long time. Then he turned to me and asked, "Do you ever wish they had welcomed you back?" I looked at the wall, at the stories, at the names written in ink and pain, then said they didn't need to. I welcomed myself. That line made it into the final video. The clip went viral. Not millions of views, but enough. Enough for other veterans to find us. Emails poured in. Then came the letters. One envelope, no return address, held only 5 words. "Still standing, thanks to you." I taped it under the first dollar bill, and the wall kept growing. One day Devin asked, "Do you think we'll ever run out of room?" I looked at him. "I hope not." Because space means people are still coming. People still fighting. People still standing. And that's all we ever wanted. Not pity, not a parade, just the space to exist without erasure. And maybe in some small way, to help others do the same.